We're going to preview some teams heading into the season. Wanted to take a look at Penn State. They're getting an awful lot of love. What the H brought to you by City Heating and Air Conditioning, cityheatandair.com. Integrity matters. So, what are your thoughts on Penn State right now? They're getting top 10 love from some prognosticators. What do you think of Penn State and their chances of perhaps winning the Big Ten or at least beating a Michigan or Ohio State or both?
I think their chances are better than a lot of people think. I'm not so sure they have the team to win it in the college football playoff because they are built like a Big Ten team. I mean, no speed on the outside whatsoever. But they were 11-2 last year. Top 10 team. I believe they get Michigan at home this year. I'm going to look that up, but I believe they get Michigan at home this year. And they upgraded their offensive line. Now, they did lose their quarterback, but I don't really think that's a big deal. I'm reading about Drew Aller, and it sounds like he might actually end up being better. They've got pretty good defense coming back, but the big thing is their upgrade on the offensive line. And with that in Michigan at home.
I mean, their offensive line should be really good. I think, I'm not going to try to pronounce his name, Olamunwaya Fashuna, was thought to be a possible first-round pick. So they've got 5 other linemen who started at least 5 games last year, and I think they can be very good up front. Here's my issue with James Franklin, and it's going to be the same thing that it was at Vanderbilt. Is he's a really good recruiter, and his teams tend to not make huge mistakes, but where's the innovation in the thinking? So they're going to put an offense in this day and age of college football. And I absolutely love running the football, but James Franklin's going to put a rushing offense on the field. And I just don't get that, Caleb.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go. I think that Penn State is not the type of school, and I still don't think they are, even though they recruited as well as they could, where you can just get by without any innovation offensively or defensively. You got to have some, and Franklin has none. And also, you can't get by with a coach who, look, I'm not picking on Franklin. Most coaches are like this, but if you're Penn State, you can't afford to have a coach like this who makes basic in-game mistakes, just really basic Butch Jones level in-game brain lapses. And he's guilty of that a lot. And if you're Nick Saban at Alabama, you can get away with it because you're loaded with talent. And honestly, there's been some times where Nick Saban has gotten away with it. And Kirby Smart can get away with it at Georgia. You can't get away with that at Penn State. That's something you can't get. You're never going to have the talent to get away with that.
I don't think they're going to score a lot of points, and then they have issues at defensive tackle and cornerback based off the productivity last year. So are they going to give up points? Where do they stop people? I think Penn State, I know you think Florida State could be one of the most disappointing teams out there, but listen, at some point, just losing to Michigan and Ohio State should be considered a disappointment because you've been at Penn State a long time, James Franklin. What's it, 10 years? So to me, that's one of the more disappointing seasons. If they do that again, I don't really have a lot of faith in them to turn things around. And then where do you go from there? So I guess what the H, I don't understand why they're getting so much preseason love at all.
I think because the default for Penn State is 10-2 because let's just run through their schedule real quick. Their toughest out of conference game is West Virginia at home. I don't know why West Virginia is still sticking with, is it Neil Brown, their head coach? I mean, I don't know why they're stuck with him or staying with him, but they're a bad team. Penn State's going to beat them. They're going to beat Delaware. They're going to beat Illinois on the road. They're going to beat Iowa. They're going to beat Northwestern on the road. They're going to beat UMass. So they're going to be 6-0 before they face Ohio State, who will also, I mean, those are 6 terrible teams I named.
Okay, let me ask you this question then. Penn State, if they only lose to Michigan and Ohio State, and there's a 12-team playoff in play, which there's not until next year, but let's say for funsies there is, would they make a 12-team playoff? Would they be one of the top 12 teams in your mind in the entire nation?
Yeah, they would have been last year, and they're going to be this year. I not me personally. I wouldn't have put them in. No, I mean, but now if we're talking in 2 years when USC and UCLA join the Big Ten, and by the way, the Big Ten is going to come out with its scheduling model today for when USC and UCLA join. So we're going to see if they have a better hand on it than the SEC. But then we might have a different conversation. But yeah, 11-2 with, I mean, I didn't name just bad teams. I named awful teams. I think Illinois is the toughest of that group, and maybe Iowa, but Iowa's at home. And then later they visit Maryland and have Michigan at home and visit Michigan State. But yeah, I think if they're 10-2, they would get in the 12-team playoff. I'm not so sure they would deserve it. But then I'm like, who would deserve it over them? I mean, I'm looking at it last year, this is the scenario you brought up last year. They were number 11. Okay, they would have been the last team in the playoff had this been the thing last year. The only other team you could have made a case for was Washington going 10-2. But was Washington's 10-2 more impressive than Penn State's 10-2?
I don't know. 10-2 is going to be where the really interesting line is drawn in the major conferences. Does Tennessee deserve to be in a 12-team playoff if they lose to Alabama and Georgia? They may not even play them, but I mean, do they deserve to be in? That's where some really interesting decisions are going to have to be made, is that 13-12 spot. I'm not as concerned about the 9-8, which would mean home game, or the 5-4, which would mean bye. Mine's the 13-12. I think you're going to have a log jam of about 8 teams that are knocking on the door at 12. Now, my argument is to Penn State, beat Michigan or Ohio State and don't worry about it. Same thing for Tennessee. Beat Alabama or Georgia. Don't worry about it. So I don't want to hear any whining, but I am going to tell you there's going to be a lot of it, because there's going to be 8-12 teams that are going to be right there jammed up against that 13 spot. And you talk about Washington 10-2, Penn State 10-2, Tennessee 10-2. I mean, if they were to all go 10-2, which could happen, you could have 6 teams with 10 wins in major conferences. I didn't even mention Clemson. You could have 6 teams right there knocking on the door that technically are not in. Some people are going to get left out on an annual basis. And I'm not just talking about one team like the NCAA tournament. Sometimes we look at 1, 2, or 3 teams. I mean, 3 or 4 or 5 teams are going to get left out, and they're going to be upset about it.
Oh, I'm with you on that. The only thing I think they've won is, if you're one of those teams, I was never for expanding it beyond 4. And if you're trying to make the case to be number 12, well, then you really didn't do what you needed to do anyway. I think the point is, and that's kind of where I stand. I will say one thing that might work in Penn State's favor. Look, this looks to be James Franklin's best team. He actually shored up his cornerbacks too. He's got the leader in Big Ten passes defended last year back. Plus, I think he has Johnny Dixon on the other side. When you combine that, plus the fact that I think Ohio State also has a guy who is not the best in-game coach running their program right now, despite their talent, and Penn State, and then Michigan is just, Michigan's like Penn State, and we'll talk about them probably another point later this month, but they're limited on their athletes on the outside. So Penn State playing Michigan at home, that in November, that's a big boost for Penn State.